My name is Margaret. I am 68 years old, and 3 weeks ago I heard my daughter sentence me to death. I had just walked down the hallway of my own house, the house I paid off with 30 years of teaching middle school, to bring her and her husband a cup of tea. The kind of simple, loving thing I had done 1,000 times. I was about to knock on the guest room door when I heard her voice. Low, careful, the voice people use when they don't want to be heard. "She has 3 months left," my daughter Claire said. "Maybe less. We need to move fast." Her husband Daniel's voice came back, quiet and steady. "Are you sure the doctor told you that?" "Yes," she said. "So we need to figure out the house situation before it's too late." I stood there in the hallway, holding 2 cups of chamomile tea, not breathing. The world went completely still. I was not sick. I had not been given any diagnosis. I had not spoken to any doctor. But my daughter, my only child, the girl I raised alone after her father left, apparently believed I was dying. Or wanted to. I walked back to the kitchen, set down the cups, and sat at my table. Everything I thought I knew about my life was about to change. Let me tell you who I was before that moment, so you understand what it cost me to hear those words. I spent 32 years teaching 7th grade English in the same school district in rural Ohio. I was not a glamorous woman. I was a practical one. I packed lunches, fixed leaky faucets myself, and drove the same Toyota Camry for 14 years because it still worked just fine. When my husband Richard left when Claire was 4, I did not fall apart. I got a second job at the library on weekends, took care of my daughter, and made sure she never felt the absence of a father more than she had to. Claire was my whole world. Smart, funny, a little stubborn, all the things I secretly admired. I saved carefully so she could go to a good college. I helped her buy her first car. When she married Daniel 8 years ago, I paid for half the wedding because she asked me to, and I loved her. My house, a 3-bedroom on Elm Street that I bought in 1998 for $94,000, was now worth close to $340,000 according to the county tax assessment. I had no debt. I had a modest retirement account, around $87,000. Nothing spectacular. But mine. Claire and Daniel had been struggling financially for years. Daniel worked in sales, and the commissions had been bad for 2 years straight. They had refinanced their condo twice. Claire called me regularly, every few weeks it seemed, to ask for help. $2,000 here. $1,500 there. Money for a car repair. Money for a medical bill. Money because the month had just been hard. In the past 3 years, I had given them just over $31,000. I gave it freely. That was my choice. She was my daughter. But the night I stood in that hallway, I began to understand that she may have been keeping a very different kind of score. The next morning, I acted normal. I made breakfast. I smiled. I asked Claire how she had slept. But I was watching now. Over the next few days, I noticed small things I had ignored before. Claire and Daniel were on their phones constantly when they thought I wasn't looking. They took calls in the backyard or behind closed doors. Once, Daniel left a notepad on the kitchen counter. I saw the words estate attorney and power of attorney. Timing before he noticed me and flipped it over with a laugh, saying he was just doodling work ideas, I laughed too. But I filed it away. On Thursday, Claire asked me how I had been feeling lately. Her voice was gentle. "Concerned, you've seemed tired, Mom," she said. "Have you been to see Dr. Hansen recently?" "I went in the spring," I said. "He said everything looked great for my age." Her face did something strange, a small flicker, almost like disappointment, before she smiled again. "Good, that's great. I just worry about you, you know." I said I knew. I poured myself more coffee. And I began to think very carefully. That evening I called my friend Judith, who has been my neighbor and closest friend for 22 years. I told her what I had overheard. I did not exaggerate. I gave her the exact words. Judith was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Maggie, you need to talk to a lawyer before you say a single word to Claire." She was right. I knew she was right, but I also needed to understand what exactly my daughter was planning. So before I called anyone, I decided to find out more. On Saturday, Claire and Daniel drove out to run errands. They were gone for 4 hours. That seemed long for errands. I looked up their car in the driveway camera I had installed 2 years ago after a package was stolen, a simple little device I had nearly forgotten about. I pulled up the history on my phone and saw they had left at 10:14 a.m. Then I did something I had never done before in my life. I looked through the notepad Daniel had left on the counter. He had torn off the top sheet, but I could see faint impressions from what had been written. I did not own a detective kit, so I did what any retired English teacher would do. I held it at an angle near the window light. 2 words appeared clearly enough to read. Capacity assessment. I sat down at my kitchen table and typed those 2 words into my phone. The results came back almost immediately. A capacity assessment was a formal evaluation, usually done by a physician or psychologist, to determine whether a person was mentally capable of making their own financial and legal decisions. If a person was found to lack capacity, a family member could petition the court to become their legal guardian. That guardian would then have full control over the person's finances, their property, their life decisions. My daughter was not mourning my death. She was planning to have me declared incompetent. And she had convinced herself, or her husband, or some lawyer, that she had 3 months to do it before I did something she could not control, like change my will, or sell the house, or simply wake up. My hands were completely steady as I picked up my phone and called the office of Robert Haynes, the attorney who had handled my property taxes dispute in 2019. His assistant said he could see me Monday morning. I said I would be there. Robert Haynes had an office above the hardware store on Main Street, the kind of place that smelled like old wood and printer ink. He was a patient man in his late 50s with reading glasses on a chain and the habit of writing everything in longhand. I told him the full story without crying, which surprised me. He asked me several questions. Had I been to a doctor recently who might have told Claire something I wasn't aware of? No. Had I signed any documents in the last year that gave anyone access to my accounts or information about my health? No. Had I ever named Claire as a beneficiary or executor in my will? Yes, in a document I signed 15 years ago. He nodded slowly. Mrs. Calloway, what you're describing has a pattern I recognize. It's sometimes called elder financial exploitation, and what makes it complicated is that it often comes from family members who believe, sometimes genuinely, that they are acting in your best interest. My daughter does not believe she is acting in my best interest, I said. He looked at me carefully. No, based on what you've told me, this appears to be more calculated than that. He paused. But here is what matters right now. You are clearly competent. You have no medical condition suggesting otherwise, and you have time to act before they do. He told me what I needed to do. First, schedule a voluntary cognitive evaluation with my own physician to document my mental clarity on record. Not because I had any doubt, but to create paper evidence that no one could challenge later. Second, do not change my will yet, because a sudden change might be used to argue I was acting erratically. Third, do not confront Claire. Not yet. Let them show more of their hand, he said. Right now you have suspicion. What we need is proof. I drove home feeling something strange in my chest. Not fear exactly, more like the cold, focused calm I used to feel before a difficult parent-teacher conference when I knew exactly what was happening and I was ready. Over the next week, I became very observant. I noticed that Claire had started asking subtle questions about my finances. Nothing direct, just gentle, curious inquiries. How was my retirement account doing? Had I looked into long-term care insurance? Did I know that property taxes in our county were going up significantly next year? She was building a case that I was struggling, that I needed help, that managing things on my own was becoming too much. What she didn't know was that I had a driveway camera, a lawyer, and 32 years of experience reading between the lines of what people said and what they actually meant. On Wednesday, Judith came over for coffee and we went through everything together. She helped me create a simple written log, every conversation, every odd question, every closed-door phone call. Dates, times, exact words as best I could remember. It was not glamorous investigative work. It was the same kind of careful documentation I had done as a teacher for 30 years, recording what actually happened so no one could later rewrite it. Judith also told me something that tightened my chest. She had seen Daniel talking to Patricia Morse, the real estate agent on Birchwood Avenue, in the parking lot of the pharmacy 2 days ago. They had spoken for about 10 minutes. Judith recognized Daniel from the holiday party I had hosted last December. My house had not been listed. I had not spoken to any real estate agent. But apparently my son-in-law had. I called Patricia Morse's office the next day pretending to be interested in a market appraisal. Her assistant scheduled me for Thursday at 2 p.m. I dressed neatly, drove myself, and sat across from Patricia in her tidy little office with the house photos on the walls. She was perfectly professional and pleasant. About halfway through our conversation, after she had asked about the property on Elm Street, she paused in a way that felt careful. "Actually," she said, "I think I may have spoken recently with a family member of yours?" I kept my expression warm and open. "Oh, really?" "A gentleman who mentioned you might be considering a transition, possibly looking at smaller options, or assisted living and thinking about the house." She seemed genuinely uncertain how to proceed. "He said you had a health situation and the family was helping you think things through." There it was, laid out as plainly as a sentence on a chalkboard. Daniel had told a real estate agent that I was sick, that the family was taking over, and that the house on Elm Street would likely be coming to market. I thanked Patricia politely, said I was still gathering information, and drove home. That night I called Robert Haynes on his cell. He listened. Then he said 4 words I will remember for a long time. "Mrs. Calloway, we move now." He filed a legal notice the next morning establishing my competency and my sole ownership of all assets. He also sent a formal letter to any financial institution or legal office that might have been approached on my behalf, making clear that I had not authorized any representative to act for me or discuss my affairs. He also told me something that explained everything I hadn't been able to understand. Claire had apparently consulted with an elder law attorney 6 weeks ago. She had told that attorney, who to his credit had declined to move forward, that her mother had been showing signs of cognitive decline and that she was concerned I might make decisions about my property that I would regret. Cognitive decline. Signs I had never shown to anyone, signs my own doctor had never observed, but signs that, written down on a legal document, could create doubt. My daughter had been building her case for at least 6 weeks. Possibly longer. What she hadn't counted on was that I was building one too. The confrontation came on a Sunday. Claire and Daniel had been staying with me for nearly 3 weeks by then, which I now understood was not a casual visit. They were present, watching, waiting for some sign they could use, and perhaps waiting for the legal machinery they had set in motion to catch up. I had asked them to sit down after breakfast. I made fresh coffee. I put the cups on the table. Then I placed a folder on the table next to the cups. Inside the folder was a printed copy of the conversation Robert Haynes had documented, including the name of the elder law attorney Claire had consulted, the date of that consultation, and Patricia Morse's account of her conversation with Daniel about the house on Elm Street. Robert had prepared a brief written summary of each piece of information, clean and factual. Claire picked it up. Her face went from puzzled to pale in about 4 seconds. "Mom," she started. "Please let me say what I have to say," I told her, "and then you can say whatever you want." I told them, calmly, what I knew. I told them what I had heard in the hallway. I told them about the driveway camera, about Judith seeing Daniel with the real estate agent, about the call to Patricia Morse's office, about what Robert Haynes had discovered regarding the attorney they had consulted. I told them that I had already completed a voluntary cognitive assessment with Dr. Hansen 3 days ago, and that the results documented my full mental capacity and language that would hold up in any court proceeding. And then I told them that they needed to leave my house by the end of the week. Daniel started talking first, a rapid, explanatory flood of words about how they were worried about me, how they just wanted to make sure I was protected, how none of it was what it looked like. Claire said almost nothing. She sat with her hands folded on the table, looking at the folder like it was something she couldn't quite believe existed. When Daniel finally finished, I said, "I understand that you were worried, but you did not ask me if I was okay. You did not sit down with me and say you were concerned. You went to a lawyer. You talked to a real estate agent about my house. You built a case, a quiet, careful case to take control away from me. That is not worry. That is something else entirely." Claire finally looked up. Her eyes were wet. "Mom, we have so much debt. We're drowning. And you thought I was already almost gone," I said, "so you started moving the pieces before I noticed." She didn't deny it. That was the hardest moment. Not the anger, the clarity. Hearing my daughter confirm in her silence that the love in our relationship had been, for at least some part of her, a calculation. They left 2 days later. Robert Haynes moved efficiently. Within 2 weeks, we had updated my will entirely. Claire was removed as executor. Judith, a person with no financial interest in my estate and 30 years of honest friendship, was named instead. My retirement account beneficiary designations were updated to reflect a trust structure Robert set up that would distribute any assets to 3 charities I had cared about for years: the local library, a teacher scholarship fund, and an animal rescue in the next county. My house was placed in that same trust, which meant that even if someone one day tried to claim I lacked capacity, the decisions had already been made cleanly, legally, and with full documentation while I was clearly and demonstrably well. Robert also sent a formal cease and desist letter to Claire and Daniel, making clear that any further attempt to represent my affairs to any legal or financial professional without my explicit written authorization would be treated as elder financial exploitation, a criminal offense in the state of Ohio. I asked him if I should report them to the authorities. He said that was my choice. I sat with it for a few days. In the end, I did not file charges, not because what they did was acceptable. It was not, but because I had already taken everything that mattered back. My house was protected. My money was protected. My future was in the hands of people who had earned that trust. Filing a criminal complaint would have cost me months of energy I preferred to spend on other things. I called Claire once after all the documents were finalized. She answered on the second ring. She sounded very tired. I told her that I loved her. I also told her that I was not the same person she had miscalculated me to be, that if she ever wanted to rebuild something real, not a relationship built on what I might leave behind, but on who we actually were to each other, I was open to that. In time. With honesty. She said she understood. She said she was sorry. I said I hoped she meant it. I didn't hang up angry. I hung up clear. It has been 4 months since I stood in that hallway holding 2 cups of chamomile tea. My life looks different now, and most of it is better than it was before. Judith and I have started walking every morning at 7 a.m. Something we kept saying we would do for years and never quite managed. We walk for an hour and we talk about everything. Books, local gossip, our late husbands, the ridiculous price of groceries, the strange, unexpected freedom of being women in our late 60s with no one to answer to. I went to see my Dr. Hansen, not for the assessment, though that document now sits in a file in Robert's office and in my own filing cabinet, but just for a regular visit. He said my blood pressure was the best it had been in 5 years. He asked what I had changed. I told him I had reduced a significant source of stress. He nodded and made a note in my chart. I have started writing again. Nothing formal, just stories I write in a journal I keep on the kitchen table. Stories from my 32 years of teaching. Students I remember. Moments that mattered. It turns out there is a great deal of my own life I had stopped paying attention to while I was busy trying to make sure everyone around me was okay. The house on Elm Street is still mine. I painted the front door red, which I had always wanted to do but somehow never done. The first morning I came downstairs and saw it through the window, I stood there for a long moment. It looked exactly like what it was. Home, as for Claire, we have spoken 3 times in 4 months. The conversations are short and careful, like people who have agreed to be polite while learning to trust again. Maybe we will get there. Maybe we won't. That is the part of this I cannot control, and I have made a kind of peace with not being able to control it. What I know is this: I am not dying. I am not confused. I am not a problem to be solved or an obstacle between my daughter and an inheritance. I am Margaret Calloway. I am 68 years old. I taught 700 children how to read and write and think for themselves. I own my home. I made my choices. I am still here. And I have never in my entire life been more certain of who I am than I am right now. If you heard your name through a closed door, what would you do? I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments. For more stories like this one, please like this video and subscribe. There are many more waiting for you.